Okay, we're talking about the four cardinal virtues. We're going to skip the cardinal virtue of justice. Aristotle devotes an entire book to it. It's not really clear how it fits within his moral philosophy, that is, in terms of an excess and deficiency. Just understand about justice. Justice for Aristotle means being a fair, objective, rational, and good person, someone who treats people fairly and equitably, and is fair in their business dealings and fair and not lying or not cheating um, in their commerce with other people. But there are three virtues, minor virtues, that Aristotle talks about in Book 4 that I think are more important almost than even the four cardinal virtues, and they sort of they don't get a lot of attention by scholars, but they start around page 100, and they are the virtue that has to do with controlling anger. He calls it some in your text. It's called gentleness. We could call it something like righteous indignation, being angry in the right way. The other virtue would be truthfulness, virtue of always telling the truth. And then the most important one, I think, it's on page 102. It's the virtue of friendliness. Friendliness. And I'll talk about this one and then I'll relate it to the other two, namely righteous indignation and the virtue of truthfulness. Friendliness, Aristotle says, is a mean or middle position between obsequiousness and grouchiness. Obsequiousness, which means kind of being overly friendly and overly nice and insincere, right? And grouchiness means you're miserable all the time and you don't want it. You're not friendly at all. And it's interesting, kind of being a miser. It's interesting. Aristotle says that friendliness is the virtue that has to do with pleasures and pains that are found in social relations. Pleasures and pains that are found in social relations. That is psychological pleasures and pains. If you're a friendly person, you know how, for the most part, to give people pleasure psychologically. That is, be agreeable when it's prudent, when it's right, and be disagreeable when it's right. And in other words, he puts it this way on 103. The position of a person who will put up with and likewise refuse to put up with the right things at the right time and in the right manner. And it bears some resemblance to friendship. So in other words, this virtue is about what you're willing to take and put up with, as well as what you're willing to agree to and disagree to. Modern psychologists in the, I think it's called the Big Five personality trait scale, puts agreeableness as a very, very good predictor of someone's personality, how agreeable they are. And this is precisely what Aristotle's talking about. How agreeable are you? Are you just a pushover? Do you put up with anything and take anything and eventually become resentful? Or are you mostly agreeable, but when someone goes too far, you push back? This is the virtue of pushing back, of knowing when to say no, of knowing when to be disagreeable, of not letting yourself be taken advantage of. It's a very important virtue for Aristotle. And why I wanted to talk about it in terms of truthfulness and anger is you can almost relate those two to it. I mean, when are you going to speak the truth and be sincere, even if it doesn't benefit you? When are you going to be truthful, even if it doesn't feel good and it may hurt someone, but it's good for them and it's good for you? Or when are you going to be angry? Do you never get angry? Do you avoid confrontation? Aristotle would say that's not good. Generally speaking, it of course is good to be agreeable and to give people pleasure, but sometimes you need to be disagreeable. You need to be angry. You need to defend yourself. You need to push back. You need to not let people take advantage of you. And these three virtues, truthfulness, friendliness, and righteous indignation, sort of all go together because they're all the virtue of, or they're the virtues that have to do with knowing what to put up with and what not to put up with, knowing how much crap to take from people and how much not to. And generally speaking, Aristotle says, he says, everything else being equal, this is on 104, the person will choose to contribute to the pleasure of others and scrupulously avoid giving pain. All things being equal. Generally speaking, we want to be agreeable, nice, kind, compassionate, courteous, generally speaking. But every once in a while, we need to push back. We need to be angry. We need to tell the truth. That's why I think the truth goes nicely here as the kind of indicator or arbitrator between, well, when do I push back? When do I get angry? Well, I think the best regulator of that is the truth. One should always strive as much as possible, and Aristotle says this, to tell the truth. And people just need to be honest. Now, that even has to be regulated to some extent because you don't want to insult people. For example, someone asks you, hey, do you like this shirt? And if you don't like the shirt, you don't have to go, no, that's terrible. Because, and I always thought, because that would hurt their feelings and it's not really much at stake, I always thought people who tell the truth that much kind of get a kind of pleasure in hurting people when they tell the truth. Aristotle's not talking about that. But what he is saying is that these three virtues know when to say no. They know when to push back and when to be angry, when to not put up with stuff. And all things being equal, we need to be friendly and pleasurable and agreeable. But every once in a while, and let truth arbitrate, we need to be disagreeable and push back and give pain to others for the good, for what's good for us and what's good for them. Oh, also, one other thing about truthfulness, or the truth as an arbitrator between anger or friendliness, is that it's just helpful, I think, to think about what we mean by truth. What is truth? Well, again, we talked about this with Nietzsche, but what do we mean when we say something is true? We mean it has to do with reality. It's in being, or it is, right? Truth is what's tantamount to being. Truth and being are the same thing. If something is true, it is. It is the case. It is being. It is in being, we should say. So one of the reasons I think that truth is such an important factor in regulating anger and friendliness is that truth integrates you. That is, truth integrates you with regard to reality. Truth will align you with reality. If you're telling the truth and you're being honest and sincere, you're in line with reality, okay? And that's good. You don't want to be not in reality. You don't want to be in your own head. And often I think this is what happens when people aren't prudent, when people lack the virtue of appropriateness and lack moral virtue in general, is that they're not attuned to what's going on in reality. And what can do that is the truth.